Welcome to the Living in His Grace podcast. In today's episode, I'll be interviewing Tom Sims. He has experience in business, ministry, nonprofit, and professional. He's been a professional coach, a writer, presenter, and a pastor for 50 years with a wide variety of life experiences. So I'll get started with some questions.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And how? Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say it's an honor to be here with you, Kayla, on your program.
I appreciate it. So the first question, how did you know your calling as a pastor?
You know, there were probably some key moments that I was feeling that nudging, but it actually started with my conversion experience at the age
Hmm.
of 8, because I remember the hymn that was being played during the time of invitation. It was "Where He leads me, I will follow."
Hmm.
And so I meant it all at that time. But then as the years went by, I was involved in some, mission organizations. I went to camp, vacation Bible school, and there were a couple of moments where I just really felt a strong urge to surrender my life to vocational Christian service. And then to watch it emerge, I was telling someone the other day at another kind of meeting that um, I began to practice. My grandmother actually had a pulpit in her attic. She would like to get me up there preaching. And then our neighbor kids, we'd find some dead animal, some dead bird, and we'd go out into the alley and dig a hole and have a full-fledged funeral. And I would conduct it. It would default. But then just, growing up in the church, having ministry opportunities, having mentors, being able to go out on visitation night and feel that this was, something that resonated with me, confirmed the call. It also you know, all the aspects of ministry, and I began to feel very good about doing Bible studies and uh, eventually sermons. I thought at one point it was a calling to foreign missions, but that began to be clarified after I came to California and explored it some more. Actually, after I said, okay, I'll do it, I'll learn a new language. And then, like, it was lifted, well, you're already on the field. And then, they invented the internet and you can go anywhere now. So I think it was through all of that process of surrender and practice and willingness and receiving peace that, when back when I was a real young man, I was still in college, and a church asked me to come on staff as associate pastor for youth, and it was an easy step, and I did. And um, that was the process. So I think that what I would say to young adults or older adults, I mean, I've taught a lot of people who were, in their definitely in their adult years, well into their adult years, who are having this midlife calling because they had that opportunity. Sometimes it's like a mid-course correction or halftime. One book called it Halftime. That there is no template for how God calls people, but you have to be sensitive, willing, and listening. Sorry to talk so much.
No, no, I was thinking, it'd be good if you talked more about that because I know it's a lot of people, it's something that a lot of people think about.
So talk more about just how we test it and
Yeah,
how
that'd be
we,
good.
yeah. Well, I don't think it's just a feeling. I think that, when Paul received his calling, I mean, there was conversion and the calling to ministry all in the one lump. There were some other people that heard it. But as I study Christian biography and history, there was a pastor of First Baptist Church of Dallas for over 50 years by the name of George W. Truett. And Truett was an amazing man, self-educated, um, and just living a godly life and thinking he would go on. And in a Baptist business meeting one night, someone made a motion. I move that we ordain George W. Truett to the gospel ministry. And he said, wait a minute. I'm not feeling that. They said, no, we feel it. So the call actually came through the people, and then it became confirmed in his life. And then you just kind of read these biographies of different ways that God has spoken to people. God knows the language we hear and will get a hold of us. Think about Elijah on the mountain, and God was not in the earthquake. Not all the places God's voice was not. And then God's voice was there in the still small voice. So I think it's always helpful for us to try to learn to listen to the still small voice. And
Yeah,
it will
definitely.
persist over time, and you get in the middle of it, you try this, because there are all kinds of ways to be in ministry. I mean, every believer is called to be in ministry of some
Hmm.
sort. We're all gifted people. But the pastoral ministry it's really a different bug sometimes, and it really consumes more of most people's time than other kinds. We dedicate our business to God, or we dedicate, and there are our ministries, but there's something all-encompassing about pastoral ministry, at least as we practice it in the Western world for the last hundreds of years. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it, but that kind of defines you, and it defines how people relate to you in society, and it becomes a lifestyle, the ministry itself. Yeah.
Well, that's
So,
good. And I'm glad you also made a point of, as we all have callings, that makes me think of 1 Corinthians 12, it shows everyone has a gift, everyone has some kind of calling. So no one's without purpose. And I just find that encouraging because, some people struggle with low self-worth if they think that they can't really do anything much, if they think I don't have enough skills. Well, the Bible says that, everyone has some kind of gift. So I just think that's encouraging, to know that there is some kind of purpose. Sometimes it
yes,
just has to be found.
absolutely. And we can get the skills. God gives the gifts, but we can acquire the skills.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, yeah, thank you for sharing. And from your experience as a pastor, are there any stories you could share of lives that have been changed, like restored marriages or overcoming addiction or anything like that?
Yeah, I read that question. You and I talked about it ahead of time. I have thought about it, and there are just so many. In all of these years of working with people and seeing the transformation, you mentioned addictions. Um, that has been one of the areas where my ministry has overlapped with other ministries. We've had uh, actually one night we were sponsoring a a church that met on Saturday nights in our building, and they were really like a biker church, and they were part of a movement called Set Free, and they have ranches all over the country where people can go and, you know, become free of their addictions through discipleship. And this particular church had started one about 30 miles from where they were meeting in our building. And they had a dispute with the landlord. And it was like, I want you 30 guys out of here tonight. And they had this conclave come in, and there were pastors from all over the state that had sent men to this program, but we had about 20 of them with nowhere to go. So I said, okay, come on over to the church and move in. And I don't know how many months they were there, 9, 12. I can't remember anymore. They took over. They built dormitories and, but we've always had this kind of overlap. But watching these guys, and of course women too, because I've had I've been work I've worked in some of the, you know, groups as well, and have been kind of, I don't know, kind of on the outside of it, but on the inside outside. Uh, it's just really exciting. One of the things that I enjoyed about having the guys on the campus, on the church campus, and there were a lot of struggles too. The kitchen was never clean. Nothing was ever clean. And when they take over, they take over. And by the way, people with serious addictions, substances, they don't lose their drama overnight. They just baptize it. Uh, there's still drama, but you could just be walking around and said, "You guys ready for a Bible study?" And everyone would, yeah, yeah, yeah. They would run back to the dorm, grab their Bible. Come on. They were hungry. That was so encouraging. I did a Bible study. I was invaded by this one group of people that were all, they came to my church. They were in the same AA group. And they said, we'd like to have a Bible study just for us and our friends from AA. And I said, great. When do you want to have it? They said, well, our meeting's on Tuesday night and we should be over by about 9 o'clock. I said, fine. We'll meet at your house at 9 o'clock. But the hunger, watching people who embrace scriptural and spiritual truth as a means of survival, knowing that that's the thing that's going to get them through, and watching them be transformed by the washing of the water and the word, that's so exciting. And of course, I've seen this happen in relationships that are restored, things I would just throw up my hands and say, and I don't want to tell too specific on any story for fear I might betray a confidence, but I would say, hey, there's no hope for this problem. Might as well just, you know, cut all the stuff and everybody get a lawyer. And I would never said that, and I never said it, but I got to say I felt it a couple times, in all honesty, because I knew I couldn't fix it, but yet God did. And then just the miraculous. I know this really impressed my mother. Oh, I was still in San Jose, and it was back, it was in the 90s. And a lady had been undeniably diagnosed with cancer, a severe cancer. And she was going into surgery the next day. And we prayed for her. She came forward. And in this church, we didn't believe it just automatically did it. We weren't part of the charismatic movement. We're Baptists. And so, you know, there's no name it and claim it, any of that. But we did anoint people with oil based upon, Paul's instructions. And we prayed for her. And I've always felt like I don't know how to pray for people sometimes. So I really asked God to show me how to pray for people, because some people need to die and they need to die well, and they need to die with joy and with peace. But anyway, I just felt led to pray with great confidence for her healing. And the next day they had the surgery. Now, I don't think it has a thing to do with me, but the whole church was praying. And some people you pray for end up dead right away. So there's no law here. But they didn't find any cancer in her. And I remember my mother just being so, wow. I'll tell you another one that's pretty exciting because I knew that if I prepared this, I would not remember everything. And I'm not going to remember everything now. But I was chaplain at the hospital, and I would just go room to room, try to visit everybody on my assigned floors, even if just to introduce myself. Now, as a chaplain, you're representing the hospital. You're representing God, but you're interdenominational, and you're nobody's trying to ask you to do something that's not in your belief system or, go against your faith, but to respect the person's faith and to respect the fact that they have no faith, and so don't come on strong. Ask permission. Permission, I would ask permission to pray, permission for everything. I don't think hardly ever denied permission to do that, even by people, with no faith or entirely different faith. But I went in, this lady, that little bubble machine you have to blow in to clear your lungs, and you have to get the bubble up and sustain it there. Anyway, it was, everybody has to do it after surgery. And she couldn't get it's a ball in there. It's a ball in this tube. She couldn't get the ball up. And she was so frustrated. And so I just listened to her. She felt like she was doing very, very badly. I just listened. And when I felt like she told me everything she wanted to tell me, I asked permission to pray. I just took what she told me. And I really believe that if there are any pastors out there listening, or people thinking about, doing ministry, or even just lay chaplaincy in a hospital or somewhere, or a prayer ministry. This is something that I'm so glad God taught me early. I tried to pray her prayer using her thoughts and her words and some of the things that I felt she wanted to talk to God about. But she didn't know she had the words for them. So she told them to me. This is the sense in which I believe we are priests to each other. A priest has two functions: to speak for God to the people, and to speak to God for the people. No, speak to the people for God and assure them of God's presence, and then take their prayers to God on their behalf. Not that you have to have that. Jesus is our high priest, but we're still a kingdom of priests. Peter says that. And so we, as in the Free Church and Reformation tradition, believe in the priesthood of the believer. And so there we are. But it has a function in community, in church. As the chaplain I worked with, he said, he was the full-time chaplain, he said, when you walk into the room, you represent the presence of God. And sometimes that's enough for the people, just to know that God cares. So I prayed her prayer. And then I left. Loved her, prayed for her, and left her in God's hands. And so 1 week later, I'm going around. I saw she was still there. Walked in the room, big smile on her face. She said, I don't think you would have had time to get down the hall. But after you were here and prayed for me, I was able to get that ball up and hold it
Wow.
there. And I never even asked for God to help her get the ball up. I was asking for, her well-being. kind of a different version of that was, I was an on-call hospice chaplain. Hospice is a program that cares for people at the end of life. And my biggest beef was the nurses wouldn't always call me in until the very end, till it was real close to the end. I wanted to get in, in the beginning and develop a relationship with the person and the family, but I was willing to do anything. But they didn't, they weren't thinking that yet. They're thinking, the stuff that they're called to do to make sure the medication is right and, there's comfort care. But anyway, I'd get these calls from nurses and they said, Pastor Tom, Mr. Jones, um, his whole body, all his organs seem to be shutting down, but he's just holding on to life. It's like, you know, his life has gone out of his body, but he's holding on to it. And we think he's got spiritual issues. And I've been around enough dying people to know that's very likely. You can hold out till you have peace with God. So will you go see him? I said, yeah, I'll go see him. I'd go see him right away. And sometimes they couldn't communicate all that well with me, but they would try. So I would try to find out, where they were. And I don't think there's any magical formula in the sinner's prayer or anything like that, but I do believe that there are certain prayers that, a person can pray along with you, and if they represent the desires of their heart. And some of them are in scripture. Like the Lord's Prayer is very powerful. And the 23rd Psalm is very powerful. So spend a little time with the person, but it wasn't going to be a long visit because you got to know when you got to be short in ministry. And so I pray. I would try to pray to the best of my knowledge, what they would be praying if they could articulate it. And prayer that really emphasized the grace of God, God's covering, God's forgiveness, all the things that might be holding them back from really trusting. A prayer of trust, a prayer of faith. And then go home. Got to know when to go home. Get a call next day or 2 days later from the nurse, all excited. They said, Mr. Jones, I don't know what you said, don't know what you did. Mr. Jones just calmed down after you left. There was peace. And he died shortly after that. And I'm thinking, boy, there's a reputation. There was this doctor named Kevorkian who used to help people die, and he went to prison for it. I said, "You're calling me Pastor Kevorkian? That I'm the angel of death or something?" Or Andrew from Touched by an Angel. He was the angel of death. You always wanted to have Tess or Monica come see you, but you didn't want to see Andrew. But God answers prayers the way God answers prayers. God knows what we need. And sometimes it's a good exit. So you asked about miracles and transformed lives, and I went off on some tangent that wasn't what you were
No,
asking
that's
for. But
that was very good.
I
Yeah,
mean,
go ahead.
one night I had to go, a guy had been caught doing awful things with a stepdaughter, teenage stepdaughter who was disabled. And his wife called me. And she's sitting on the couch across from me. He's sitting in a chair across the room with a loaded shotgun. And I'm trying to explain to him why she or I'm a mandated reporter. I can explain what that means if necessary, but would be calling the authorities and why he was going to go to jail. Well, he was going to have to be arrested because he had committed a crime. And, but, also trying to be his pastor because I had been, even though he wasn't a part of my church. He wasn't a member of my church. I'd been his pastor because I buried one of his children, been a part of their lives. And so he said, I got this shotgun here and it's loaded. I don't know what I'm gonna do with it. I didn't have any problem. The next day, they sent, about 10 officers to pick him up from his house, but he just walked out and gave himself up. That's an answer to prayer too. You know, he took his medicine and he came out and decided to live a productive life after that. But
Wow.
in the pastorate, you get with people and you learn to know that people can change, their lives can be changed in ways that we don't imagine.
Yeah, I love that. All things are possible with God. I just always like to remember that. Uh, so yeah, I mean, there were a couple of things you said that I was going to go back to. When you were talking about prayer, praying on behalf of someone, that reminded me of a book where the person was talking about intercessory prayer, and he would take on the burden of the person he was praying for, even to the point of being willing to die in their place if that was necessary. And I don't know if God would do such a thing. Um, but he did feel like God was putting that on his heart, to have to feel what they're feeling, to kind of be in their shoes. And that also goes with a Bible verse. I think it's Hebrews 13:3, to remember those that are in bonds as if you're bound with them. And so it'd be like
Yeah.
persecuted Christians, to when you're praying for the persecuted Christians, imagine being with them,
Right.
and try to take on that. So that might be a little bit different, but it
No,
just reminded me as far as
that
like
is
praying on someone's
a
behalf.
very pastoral prayer, a very priestly prayer mode. It, so one thing when I've had students, and I've done some seminary classes, um, I don't know how to teach someone to love the people.
Hmm.
But to me, loving the people through prayer, through self-giving, that is just one of the things, one of the key components of the call. You can't hate people or dislike people and be effective in ministry, I don't think.
Hmm.
You got to have an affinity. It really does bother you, and you have to learn how to leave things kind of at the office and go live. You don't want to be codependent. That's a whole different kind of thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it took me a long time to not be guilty when I answered the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning and someone said, "Oh, were you sleeping?" "Oh, no, I was just up waiting for your call." No, I was sleeping. And then there came a time in my life in ministry where I just had to turn off the phone at night because I knew that my health wouldn't allow me to go, and I shouldn't be driving, and you know I was on my nighttime medicine. But I was an old man in ministry, but I've been out many times in the middle of the night, and anyway, there you go.
Yeah. So that would be another thing. I'm glad you brought up that too about I guess prioritizing things, you wouldn't want to be ineffective by overextending yourself, but Um, yeah, so that would be different from the prayer because the prayer thing would be, you're praying on their behalf, you're taking on the burden in prayer, and that doesn't mean necessarily that you would be overextending yourself, like I don't know, like
We
letting them keep you
never
up
do
12
not
hours of the
have
night.
Christ. We always have Christ, our mediator, with
Hmm.
us, and he is the high priest. But um, we, we live this life emulating him, walking with him, partnering him with him. What Paul said, and we are laborers together with God. And so, um, but yeah, if you don't take care of yourself in any helping profession, by the way, not just, the pastoral ministry, you don't have anything. If you don't have anything, you can't give anything. Now,
Hmm.
God will supplement. You end up giving more than you have. But if your well is dry,
Hmm.
um, I knew a guy who was a pastor in my denomination, and Baptist, which I said, and he had been an elected official as well in local government, and he quit being not being pastor. He quit being elected official, and he was one of these guys that kept getting elected and elected and elected. He could have gone on forever. That his job didn't have term limits. He was very popular, and so I don't know whether it was me or somebody else asked. He was speaking at the pastors' conference, giving his testimony about why he quit. I said, "Well, why'd you go into it in the first place? Nothing wrong with it. I mean, if that's your calling." He said, "Because I was bankrupt." I said, "What do you mean you were bankrupt?" I or somebody else. He said, "Spiritually bankrupt. My well was dry. I needed something that I didn't have." And you don't want to go bankrupt. You want to, you got to make sure you are nurturing your own spiritual life. It's like when on the airplane, they say, put your own mask on first and then help the kids. And it's like in life saving in the water, you got to make sure that, the person is not going to drown you rather than be saved by you.
That makes sense. Yeah, I like to think of what Jesus said in John 15 about abiding in the vine. He said, "Apart from me, you can do nothing."
Yeah.
And so, you have to abide in him first before you can produce the fruit. So it's just good to keep in mind. I saw an article years ago about it's by a missionary, and he said something about his relationship with God was non-existent, and was just thinking, well, it doesn't have to be that way. And then, I think being in ministry, it's just easy to fall into that trap. I catch myself doing that to, get caught up in things. But it's good to keep our priorities in line.
Yeah, there's nothing more important than nurturing
Hmm.
your walk with God and everybody everybody has to do it who's going to be have a sustainable ministry.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Also, you did talk about an answer to prayer, or maybe more than one. No, I think it's more than one answer to prayer, which was actually I was going to bring up that point too about um, answers to prayer. Well, what is the biggest answer to prayer you've seen?
That's what I don't know what the
Too many.
biggest one is. But I thought about something today that was just what I really say awe to is when I see everything lining up. Um, I've done a lot of urban ministry and a lot of ministry among the poor. And so there was this long period of prayer and seeking God on starting a ministry out of our church. So it was a church-based nonprofit, but I was trying to find a name for the church that would really reflect who we were, what we did. I did. I'd never had liked the name of the church that I'd inherited. It had a theological problem as far as I was concerned, not a bad one, but it required explanation, and it was it was so old school that, nobody really would want to be attracted to it. I didn't think, but it didn't matter as much to others as it did to me. But we were also in a really nondescript part of the city. It didn't have an identity, except if you looked at the census, we were in the top 22 areas of concentrated poverty in a city that was at the top, the very top, one and two, Fresno and Bakersfield would vie for one and two city with concentrated neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. And ours was in one of them, or right on the edge of one of them. And yet there was no particular tree in the middle. There was no statue. There was nothing like would say, this is the something district. I was at the corner of Ashland and Fresno Street, which, by the way, is a double thing because a Fresno is an ash tree. So I was in Ash and Ash, and that doesn't sound like a name. So I'm praying for a name. And so, well, what's our address? 4141 Ministries. So I took the Bible and I started opening the Bible. I'm saying, okay, God, there's got to be a chapter 41, verse 41 that will work. Do you know there's only one chapter 41, verse 41 in the whole Bible? Genesis. So I look it up. And uh, Pharaoh gave Joseph authority over all the affairs of Egypt. Oh, that's it. Well, we were trying to do asset-based community development, which says, okay, the assets for this community are in the community. God has already worked in this community, as Henry Blackaby would say, and God has put people here that can rise up and do this work. And I'm thinking, okay, so what's 4141? What's this thing about Joseph in Egypt? What did he do? Where did he get the crops and that he built the storehouses for? All Joseph really did was, under God's authority, he did community organizing. He equipped the people to become a blessing to themselves, to save their nation, and to be a blessing to the nations around them, and as a result, to bring Israel to live in the land, and as a result, for them to come out and become the manger through which the Son of God would come into the world and be a blessing to all people. I said, well, there's something to this 4141. So I said, let's start our organization. We'll call it 4141 Ministries, and we can access other kinds of funding and from other churches and foundations, and we can do the boots on the ground kind of ministry we want and that we feel God is calling us to. And we did. We set it up. We got, but as you know, with nonprofit world, you got to get a 501c3 recognition for the Internal Revenue Service. And so I created the bylaws. We did all this stuff, and we applied, and we created a corporation in the state of California. And we applied for the 501c3. Didn't come, didn't come, didn't come, didn't come. Some of these things were getting buried, and 18 months went by. Now, I just helped somebody get a 501c3 in 2 months, one of my clients, but couldn't figure out what was going on. My wife calls. She says, and she finally gets somebody at the Internal Revenue Service, believe it or not. Somebody at the IRS is talking to her, and they found the application buried in a pile of papers on the desk. Well, I'm thinking, okay, now it'll be another 6 or 8 months. Well, in the meantime, we're just going about our business, doing the Lord's work. In the morning of such and such. Well, let me go back and tell you another piece of the story if this isn't getting too boring and convoluted. In the meantime, we've been working ever since I came to Fresno. We were working at this place called Granny's Park. It was a neighborhood. There were about 15 apartment complexes. Every month I would bring the managers together. I would bring the neighborhood police representatives. They were called a pop team at first, and they were called neighborhood policing. We would have a lunch. We'd put on a lunch for them, talk about the problems in the neighborhood, talk about problem people. Police would give advice. Police were actually the big attraction. That's how I got the managers to come, the apartment managers, because they knew the police would be there and they could gripe at them and they could get some help. And then we would maybe we would put on block parties at this park called Granny's Park. There was an old guy named Ernie Burton. Ernie had lived with his mother for many years, and Ernie had just a deep desire. He was an alcoholic. He was falling down every time I saw him, and but he had a heart as big as the great outdoors, and he put on these events for children in that park. And it was just an empty lot with needles and all kinds of stuff. And he got the city. He would, every time he'd have an event, he'd have the media out there, and he'd have the mayor, and he'd have all these people that he would just badger until they helped him. And so finally, the city adopted it as a park and put grass in there. And Ernie's mother got saved, and so the chaplain of the sheriff's department agreed, even though he was an Assembly of God pastor, he'd never baptized anybody by pouring water over their head, but she was in a wheelchair. So they rolled her out into the park. He took a great big old bucket of water. Her name was Granny Burton, Granny Nan Burton. Poured that bucket of water over her and, broke with his tradition, but consecrated her and that park. I say they baptized the park, baptized her, planted themselves there, and okay, anyways, becoming a park. And then one of Ernie's friends who worked for the city got a building, a double wide mobile home put in there, and it was a National Science Foundation grant to make it a science center for kids. I never had a key to that building. I was kind of the unofficial chaplain of the neighborhood, chaplain to the neighborhood police, all this stuff. But I didn't have a key and I didn't have access and couldn't use it for ministry. Always wanted to use it for ministry. Always wanted to use it for ministry because that church, that neighborhood didn't have a single store. It didn't have any meeting places. It just had that park, and we would put on block parties there, and we'd bring in the motorcycle believers, and we'd always we'd have the same people get saved every month, but it was still, we did all kinds of stuff, Saturday sports, but no access to a building. Okay, now we're rolling around back to the 501c3. Are you tracking me? Or do I need to slow down or speed up? Anyway,
That's good.
I get a call from Andrea, my wife. She says, our letter of approval from the IRS came. I said, that's great. We can start collecting donations. That's the only thing we really couldn't do. Have money. Some things take money. Money's that thing that when you need it, it's the only thing that'll do. And anyway, that was in the morning. That afternoon, I get a call from a friend of mine who, there are these people that are catalysts for ministry in a city and urban ministry. And this guy, Artie Padilla, he was the one. He had his fingers in everything in the city that was official and unofficial and church. He made things happen. And he was my friend. So, and he knew what we'd been doing all those years at Granny's Park and around Granny's Park and in the apartments. He knew that, we prayer walked it. We'd go through the neighborhoods. We would see transformation in people's lives. We really did. And we had moved, one of our he had moved himself in there. He bought the only freestanding house in the neighborhood. Everything else was apartments and dedicated to the glory of God. He and his wife walked the neighborhood every night. Anyway, Artie calls me on the phone as I'm pulling into my driveway. And he said, they've taken the Science Center out of the building at Granny's Park. And the city, Parks and Recreation, could not afford to run programs in any of their centers, any of their things they had in place. He said, they're looking for somebody to go in and run programs. Do you want it?
Wow.
There are times when it's pre-prayed. There are times when you got to say, I got to go back and pray about it. That was pre-prayed. There was only one answer. I said, yes, we'll sign the contract. And so we got in there and we developed a day program. We brought in another Christian program. We were able to get some funds to hire some people. We got in there and we did after school programs. We ended up moving our whole church into there, at one point, and on Saturdays. And we just basically did children's church as an outreach to the neighborhood. And that's lasted until COVID. And then everything shut down. They had to shut down all the city-owned property. And so the prayer, you're talking about one prayer with one answer. This was a sustained over years prayer with big answers. And now I'm thinking, okay, we can't do ministry there. And I'm having my body's shutting down. It was for a while. And what is going on, God? And across the street from that park right now, as I speak, the Fresno Mission, which used to be a rescue mission, bought like a city block of office buildings and converted it into a ministry center. And there are about 30 faith-based nonprofits in that building and 2 churches meeting in there. So when God took me out and our church out, he put somebody in who could do a better job.
Oh,
That might be the biggest one.
mm,
But then I don't know. But that
yeah. I
the
like
whole life, it's been
mm,
life.
oh. I like to see when God turns things around, when it looks like, this is not going to um, it's not going to work, and then he does something. So that's good.
Well, most of the things God lays on my heart, I don't bring to fulfillment.
Mm,
I just get to be there, maybe in the beginning or along the
mm.
way, but somebody else steps in and takes it to the next level. So I'm just honored to be some maybe part of the catalytic process.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good
Like your
point to make.
podcast, to be one of your early guests on your podcast. Oh, the places you will go, as Dr. Seuss said.
Yeah, so a couple more questions. I think we're running short on time, but um,
Yeah.
so yeah, actually these are both mental health issues, kind of.
And that's
So
really
in
why you wanted me on here, and I haven't even
well,
given you can cut out all the other stuff if you like.
oh, I have a wide variety of things that I'm interested in just because of for the sake of, seeing God working in people's lives and also, like serving
Mm.
him. So um I like it all. Anyway, So in ministry, I always come across people who are struggling with depression or suffering in general. And what would you say helps more than anything for getting through difficult times?
You know, my mother married her boss, who was a clinical psychologist. I mean, they both lost their spouses. He lost two, and she lost one. And then she had run his office for years, and they got married. And he was 80. They were both 80. And he closed his office down when he was about 82, closed his practice and started going to, he got hired out to nursing homes. And he said he had a hard time billing. He could have billed Medicare. He was supposed to bill Medicare. He said, but these people just need somebody to listen to them. And I thought, okay, there are a lot of people that just need somebody to listen to them. I mean, God listens to us, doesn't he? People don't always know that. And I I've had some experience with counseling. I've had some training in counseling, pastoral counseling. I try to differentiate it from therapy, but I have had a lot of people that I've worked with and some people that have helped get over some humps. And everybody, even if they're doing therapy, they need life management. They need social skills. They need things and not everybody can afford therapy. And I had a long list of people I could refer people to, but they had to earn a living. And I would have this conversation with them. And I said, the church is the first line. Now, a pastor needs to know the limitations and the pathologies they can deal with and the danger zones. And they need to know when someone needs to go to the emergency room and needs to be evaluated for medication. Um, Not everything can be treated with talk or prayer, although prayer could answer anything. Some of the healthiest people I've ever met, spiritually healthy, were on mental health wards, suffering from severe mental health diseases like schizophrenia and bipolar. And yet, when it came time for, I would go in and have a worship service. When it came time for prayer, I would get some of the most beautiful prayers from them and deep insights because God was the one thing that was keeping them going with all this torment that was going on in their minds.
That's good to bring up because there was this one person I was thinking about one time. I think I was not even praying for her at the moment, but I was just thinking about her, and then a verse came to my mind. It's Psalm 55:22, cast your burden on the Lord, and he shall sustain you. And I was thinking, wow, that really makes sense for her because of um just the promise that, he is able to give us strength no matter what. And
He
and
is.
so
And
I've heard
sustain
testimonies
is
of
doesn't always mean you're getting well, but you're sustained through it.
who
I had a guy that lost his leg in Vietnam. He got shot off.
yes.
I'm sorry, you just froze.
No, it's fine.
Anyway,
I think there's a leg, but you can continue.
this guy lost his leg. He was shot off in Vietnam. And somewhere between PTSD, which I didn't see much PTSD in it, but he was schizophrenic. And, but he was also a spiritual giant. It's just that every so often he would get in this really destructive delusion and he'd end up at the VA hospital in lockdown. But God's grace, it was sustained him. And
Mhm.
he found love in our church, and he got married, and his life was productive. It's just that every now and then he would think that God had completely healed him. He didn't need his meds anymore, and he would go off. And um, so sometimes my job as a pastor was to say, "This is a medical condition you have, my brother, and it's like cancer. You got to treat it. And if God wants to heal it, He will. I pray He will." But I would just see some of the just wonderful people. I met some wonderful people who suffered with and often learned to live with mental illness and to compartmentalize it so that they it didn't destroy their lives.
Hmm. That's a good point. That actually reminds me a little bit of my experience with some irrational fears, which you know how spiritual OCD is, that it can be really irrational. Sometimes
Yeah.
the things that you know we can think of with just doubting God's acceptance and thinking like maybe this small little thing happened to be a sin, things that, are obviously not sin at all, like which spoon is the right one to choose. It's just kind of crazy stuff. And back when I think it was back when I was down in my salvation, because I've had like different types of ways that it comes out. But when I think it was when I was doubting my salvation, it's kind of like, wait a minute, the evidence is already there. I do have a relationship with God. It's just that these fears are irrational. And so I was able to separate it and say, okay, well, that's irrational. So I'm not going to put any weight to it, because that's the irrational part of my brain. I'm just not going to listen to it anymore. And that helped, And so when you said about compartmentalize, it just kind of reminded me of my own experience of separating that, so I would just focus on the more rational things and,
Yeah, I
God's
can't
acceptance.
preach it out of you, but if I were to try, it would be with a lot of verses about grace. But theologically, we have the answer,
Hmm.
and we
Galatians
reinforce
5.
that. I'm sorry,
Galatians 5.
Galatians 5. And so we have the answer, but to to I mean, it's not just cognitive. You have to have an experience of it. And
Hmm.
then, there are other things that are God has given us, you know, tools to use, ways to put the balm in Gilead on our wounds. And um,
Mm, yeah. I'm sorry, did you have more to say about that?
I was just going to say, a lot of it's life management. It's awareness. You said you're aware.
Hmm.
This doesn't come out of a Christian context, but John Nash was a Nobel Prize winner, a brilliant mathematician who invented game theory, or really discovered and articulated it. And he was at MIT, I think it was, and he began to see grand illusions. And so he was sunk into a very debilitating schizophrenia and was really on the shelf for many years, many years. And one day he just sort of ended up in his right mind. Now, again, I don't really know anything about John Nash's faith, but they made a movie about him called A Beautiful Mind. But years later, they asked him in an interview. I read this interview, it wasn't in the movie or anything. Uh, John, do you still hear the voices? He said, yes, I hear the voices every day. He said, I've just learned to recognize what they are. And I think that's, when we in Romans 7, Paul talks about the duality of in our spirit, or between the spirit and the flesh. that what I would do, I don't do, and what I wouldn't do, I end up doing. Oh, wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death? I thank God through Jesus Christ our Lord. And so he recognizes that there's still this spiritual war. Well, there's often mental war. But one of the things that a pastoral role or a ministry role or a church role can do is take the stigma away from mental illness, have a welcoming attitude toward people, and help give them the support that they need to see the dichotomy and to recognize, is that a false voice or a true voice? Is that false condemnation or true condemnation? Not with a guilt trip. Not, oh, you should feel guilty for feeling guilty. Boy, that's a trap that you never get out of. It just keeps sucking you in. It's just trying like to fight the quicksand. But I think that we hide mental illness. We're ashamed of it. We think it's demon possession. Not that the demons can't get in there. They'll have a party on
Yeah,
any
I've
kind
heard
of weakness.
testimonies. I've heard testimonies of people becoming free from spiritual oppression, whether it's depression or if it's hallucinations, things like that. I have heard of, things that, but, I mean, I believe in physical causes too. So I think it's good to, think about the different causes, whether it's biological um
Yeah,
or
I
whatever
mean,
else,
a lot of times it's all of these things because
it can be a
the
combination.
satanic is opportunistic.
Hmm.
So,
Definitely. I think he does take advantage of people who are more vulnerable to this, if
well,
they're more mentally
all my
at risk.
vulnerabilities are areas of attack.
Hmm.
Every vulnerability I have, even if it can be a strength, is going to be an area of attack. So I think the church is in a unique position to be a helper for those who are suffering with
Yeah.
mental health issues. So I really love what you're going to be doing, and what you're doing in coaching, in helping to build people, helping them to build a strong emotional life and integrating it with the spiritual and the biblical. And I think that I've heard you talk about some of the programs that you're developing. I just want to see you continue to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. And thank you for all your help. And I don't think I mentioned that you are a business mentor. I did say you had experience in business, but I don't think I said you were a mentor. Um, so I'm not sure if you would like to share anything about that, or I think you did want to share your contact information, right?
Oh yeah, I forgot to put it on my slide, but it's Link Tree, which the dot is before the two E's. Link Tree, so it's Link TR and then dot EE / TOMSIMS. And that should get you everything you need. Or if you want to schedule something on Calendly, it's calendly.com / Coach Tom Sims. But yeah, I can be found. You just Google Tom Sims in Fresno or Clovis, and I'll show up somewhere. This mug will be out there. I have never had any anonymity. I'm not famous by any means, but if you work hard enough at it, you'll find me. I'm Tom Sims on Facebook. I'm Tom Sims on X. I'm Tom Sims on
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Yeah, yeah. I'm just me, just me. And I'm very happy to talk with anybody, and I'll give them a free first session and make it productive enough so that if they don't want to come back, that's fine, before anybody has to pay me anything. But yeah, to me, it's an extension of all the years of ministry. It's a way to help people with an entrepreneurial itch get somewhere, and it often leads to me becoming someone's pastor again. So that's that's always a blessing,
Yeah, that's
or
great.
one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate your help, as I'm trying to start a business. So Yeah, thank you. And thank you for being a guest. And thank you everyone for listening. And please stay tuned for more of these interviews. So God bless.